This video is about the command line or command prompt, or also known as the terminal prompt. The command line, command prompt, the terminal prompt, this is an environment that every IT professional will need to learn at some point. So it'll be good to begin to get familiar with the command prompt so that you can grow in it and eventually learn how to use it on a regular basis. In fact, I'll say that IT professionals and programmers tend to prefer the command line over the traditional environment, which is the Windows or Mac Finder environment. That is the different windows that you work with that show files, etc. Here's my home directory, here's my desktop. There's plenty of folders that we can look at. We can look at different folders and then within them other folders, and we can have multiple windows open to different locations at the same time and drag files between them, etc. Very convenient environment, but not one that we prefer to work with when we're working in an IT shop. Usually we prefer to work with the command line. This is a Mac command line, also known as a Unix command line. And it's similar looking to the Windows command line. In fact, if we look at these two, we see that they're relatively simple or relatively similar. On Windows, when you open up the command prompt, you'll see a little copyright notice from Microsoft, and then you see this prompt. And on the Mac, you'll see something like last login, although it'll vary, and a prompt. Now, this prompt that we're looking at is actually, you can see I have a blinking cursor in this prompt. The prompt is actually our opportunity to issue commands to the computer. In fact, you can think of the command prompt as an alternative to the Windows system or the windowed system that we use on the Mac or the PC. The command prompt is the original way that we spoke to the operating system, the way that we issued commands like moving files around, copying files, deleting files, creating directories, all of those things we normally do through a windowed environment. We're now going to begin to learn how to work within the command line environment where we can do the same things. And I'll give you a really, really quick demo. If I wanted to create a directory in the Mac on or Unix, I can use the mkdir command, which says make a directory this dir, and I'm doing it in my home directory. And if I actually take a look at my home directory, and I, let's say, organize the folders by alphabetically, this is going to be called this dir. Let's go down to the T's here. If I execute this command, you actually should see the folder appear right in the windowed environment. So as you can see, the command line and the windowed environment, I'm not talking about Windows, I'm talking about little windows like these. There are actually two different approaches for talking to the operating system and asking it to do various things. And what sorts of things do we ask the operating system to do? Basically, to move files and folders around, create and delete files and folders, and also to execute programs. Now, what we'd like to do with the command line is get used to the environment and get used to some basic concepts that are important or that are necessary for understanding this environment. I'll begin by removing this directory that I just created. Now, don't worry about those commands that I just did. That was really just a quick demo. What we want to do is begin by asking where we are. There's a concept that I introduced with the file system, with looking at relative paths, and that's something called the present working directory. The present working directory is the current location for this terminal session. Understand that any terminal session actually has a location that's implied, the place where we are currently. On the Mac, we can, first let's talk about actually opening up such a prompt. On Windows, what you'll do is you'll search for Anaconda prompt. Now, on Windows, you can ask for CMD, which is the regular command prompt that is provided by Windows, but Since we're going to be working with Python and more specifically Anaconda Python, I'm going to recommend that you search for the Anaconda prompt. And when you do search for that, you should see it as a choice, and you'll open up a window similar to this one. It'll be different colors, it'll look slightly differently, but you'll see a blinking cursor and you'll see that you are in a particular place. That's how you would do it in Windows. If you want to do it on the Mac, you would search for terminal. This is how I got to my terminal program. I type terminal, and then I see terminal app, and it's the top hit. And when I execute that, it goes ahead and opens up a folder for me. Yours will be black on white text. You can change that by right-clicking and going to Inspector if you'd like to make it a green screen like this one, up to you. But the very first thing that we want to know when we first launch a window like this one is where are we? And on the Mac, we need to ask pwd. This would also be true on any Linux installation. The pwd command says where we are, but you're going to find that this command does not work on Windows. Why? Because we don't need it. If you look closely at your Windows prompt, and I recommend you go ahead and open up that Anaconda prompt and take a look at it, or if you're on the Mac, open up that terminal prompt and take a look at it. Try some of these commands out. You'll see that the Windows prompt has the present working directory in the prompt. So we never need to ask where we are. Windows will always tell us where we are. However, on the Mac doesn't necessarily tell us. So we need to ask. pwd is the way to do that. Now you can see that where I am currently is users David. And in fact, if I were on the Mac, or on the PC rather, I would see C:users David. This is the absolute path to the present working directory. It's where we are currently. Now the first thing that I want to do is I want to get to some folders that I can move around within. In fact, what I'd like to do is reach the folders that I've included with session 3 and actually also session 4. Let's take a look at session 4. Now, if you're working with a different class, maybe you don't have a session 4 folder, you should either work with another structure that you know about that you can play with. Maybe open it up in a Finder or Windows Explorer window so you can go find it. Up to you. I recommend, though, that you work within the directory structure that I'm suggesting here, this dir1 directory structure that I have here inside of my session folder. And if you need that structure, I can make it available to you. When we look at this structure of folders, we can see it pretty clearly by expanding all the folders underneath dir1 here. Now this is pretty tiny. I have another representation of that in a file structure, which I don't have in this slide, but I do have it here. This directory structure, which is graphically represented here, is also represented within my PyCharm because I have those same folders included in the session 3 and session 4, and actually most of the session folders that you'll find in the introductory course. If you're in the advanced course, you may need to ask me for this folder structure if you'd like to play with it, or you may find it in your session folder. Now looking at this and comparing it, you'll see that my representation of it is the same as the representation here. In fact, I think it's a little more readable because PyCharm puts all the files at the bottom, which means that it's kind of hard to see which is which or which is where. So I'm going to work with this knowing that as soon as I can get into dir1, I'll be able to move around within these other directories pretty easily. So how do we get to that dir1 if we're trying to do that? Well, if we're working from the command prompt, we're going to need to know how to get there. In fact, we're going to need to know a fair amount about not only where we are, but what we have access to at this point. As you can see, I'm in users David. If you're working in Windows, you should be in C users and then whatever the name of your home directory is. That's usually where these terminal prompts will take you. They'll start you off in the home directory. This is my home directory where all my files are. Now what I'd like to do is move around within the file system. Again, I'm in a particular location, this particular location happens to be my home directory. If I want to do things in other folders, I have the choice of actually moving into those folders. The first command besides pwd, which again is only available on Unix, on the Mac, is ls or dir. Let's do an ls on the Mac, but if you're on the PC, do dir. Now what I see with ls, in fact, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to say ls-l. ls-l will give me a long listing of files that shows me what's in this directory. And if you do a dir on the PC, dir instead of ls-l, if you do dir, you'll see a similar listing for the directory you're in right now. Mine is my home directory, so I've got a lot of things in here. I've got a lot of scratch files and experiments and stuff that I'm really terrible about cleaning up. It's got some other directories too. It's got the downloads directory. This is in my home directory, and the Dropbox directory, and also the desktop directory. Now I'd like to compare what I'm seeing here to what I'm seeing in a windowed environment, because the windowed environment is very clear to me. But I also want to make sense of this command line environment. What I'm seeing is that in my home directory, I have a desktop. Let's put this in order here. I have a desktop folder. I have a documents folder. I have a downloads folder. You can see that this command line view of the files should be more or less identical to the files that I see in a windowed environment. That is in my Mac Finder window. Now it's important to know where we are and what folders are available to us, because if I'm interested in moving around, I'm going to need to know the names of folders that I want to move around in. For example, maybe I'd like to get into downloads. And the reason I want to do that is that inside downloads, I have Python data, and that's where I've got my session folder. So I'm going to want to travel over there. What I can do is use a command called cd. Now, I want to mention to you that if you want to clear the screen, as I sometimes do, on the Mac you can say clear. On Windows it's CLS. So on the Mac it's clear, on Windows it's CLS, and that'll clear the screen for you. And now I'd like to use my understanding that the downloads directory is in my home directory, and I'm going to say cd downloads. Now, if you watched my video on file paths, you'll recognize this as a relative path relative to where I am currently. In other words, I knew that the downloads directory was in my home directory, so I knew that I could say cd downloads. At this point, I couldn't say cd downloads because Python doesn't know where it is. In other words, the relative path, the one that we are using most of the time, the relative path needs to be valid for the directory that we're in currently. In the first case, it was. I was in my home directory, and in my home directory, there's a downloads directory. See, I'm in my home directory, and there's the downloads directory. So saying cd downloads makes a lot of sense. And if I say pwd, I'm going to see users David downloads. This should work the same for you on the PC or the Mac, because PCs and Macs, they all have desktop and downloads directories in the home directory. So unless your system is a little more a custom environment set up by, let's say, your IT department, then you should find the downloads directory and the desktop directory in the home directory. Let me show you another command for moving around. I'd like to move to the parent directory. Again, if you watched and dealt with the video for relative paths with files, you'll know that ... means the parent. So I was in my home directory, I cd'd into downloads, I did a pwd, and I see that I'm in downloads. I cd'd ... and I now see that I'm back in my home directory. So it behooves you to play around with this a little bit. You want to become aware of what directory you're in. You want to know what folders are above and below this folder or directory. And you want to be able to move around freely between them. Doing ls or dir and doing cd up and down the tree. Tell you what, I know that downloads has Python data in it. I'm going to use CD and downloads and Python data to get in there in one shot. By the way, if you're working on Windows at the command line, you're going to be wanting to use a backslash instead of a forward slash. Here I'm going down 2 levels in one shot. I was at users David, and then I said, let's go into downloads, and inside that, let's go into Python data. And Python did it for me, or the operating system did it for me. PWD tells me that I am in Python data, and Python data is in downloads, etc. So we did some of these things before when we looked at the file system and trying to understand, relative paths. It's really important that we master these relative paths because they're going to allow us to do all kinds of moves within the file system. We're going to be able to move down and up at will, and it's going to be really, really easy. For example, I'm in downloads Python data. Let's say I want to go to the desktop. Now, where is the desktop in relationship to where we are? Well, Python data is here. Python data is inside downloads, and downloads is inside my home directory, and inside my home directory there's desktop. So desktop and downloads are actually in the same directory as each other, and that is inside my home directory. So here's how I'm going to get into desktop with just one move. I'm going to say cd ... and where would that take me? If I'm in the path you see just above this, what would ... take me to? It would take me down to downloads. And if I say ... again, that's going to take me down to the home directory. And then if I wanted to go up from there, I could say desktop. And it would take me to my desktop folder. So I actually executed a lateral move across the file system. I moved from downloads, which is here, over to desktop, which is, from Python data, which is here inside downloads. I moved from there down to the home directory and up to the desktop so I could, get in there. And from here, of course, I can do an ls or a dir to list out the files, ls-l for a long listing. Now, this is just the beginning of what we'll be able to do with the terminal prompt, the command line, once we get proficient at it. I can tell you for sure that you're going to use this more and more as you become more and more familiar with it, because it becomes very easy to do some pretty powerful things. The last thing I'd like to do is show you how to execute a script from the command line. That's going to be really, really important. First, I'd like to give you a little side commands. One of them is command recall, or we call it command history. If you do an arrow up, you should see the last command you executed. Keep going up, and it will continue to cycle through the different commands that you issued most recently. And it's a really great way to execute the same command over and over and over again without having to retype it. Very, very convenient. So why don't we try to get into the Python data folder if we can? Again, we need to be aware of where we are and where things are. In this case, we are in the desktop folder, which is up here, and we want to get to the downloads folder and then into the Python data folder. So why don't I just do it in pieces rather than trying to do some fancy path. Here we go. I'm going to say clear to clear the screen. I want to cd down into where? My home directory. And now I'd like to cd up into the downloads directory. And where is my Python data folder? It's inside of downloads, so I should be able to say cd Python data and do an ls-l, and I should see that all of those folders that have been prepared for this course are here in the Python data folder. And I was able to move through there by saying, okay, where am I currently? Where do I want to go? I want to go to the parent, so I went to the parent. I want to go to, I'm going to confirm where I am. I'm going to go to downloads from the parent, right? That's perfectly reasonable. You should be able to go in there. And then from there, I wanted to cd into Python data because I could see that Python data is there. So I had downloaded, I wanted to unzipped it, and now I want to CD into it. Now I'm in it. Now I'd like to go to session 4. Let me show you another really great shortcut. I'm going to clear this screen. I know that in Python data, there's a folder called session04, but I see it as a rather long name. So if I wanted to get into that folder, I'm going to say cd space, then session 04, and then before doing anything else, even before typing anything else, I'm just going to hit tab. And when I hit tab, it actually completes the command for me, and that's because it was unambiguous. You know, there are a number of session folders. If I say SESS and hit tab, it's going to take me through to session because there are a bunch of folders. They're all called session. But it's not going to take me to any other of the folders that are available here because there's no unambiguous path to it. In other words, if I type in 04, there's only one session 04 folder. So here's how I can complete the path if I've got an unambiguous name beginning. I could hit tab, and hitting tab completes the whole name as long as it's an unambiguous appearance within the folder. In other words, there's only one session 04 folder, you know. Then I can hit tab, and it will complete the path for me. It's something we call tab completion for obvious reasons. Okay, so now I'm in the session 04 containers list sets, and I'm going to do an ls-l and see that there's the dir1 folder. Again, you can go back and forth between the folders that you see in the Finder window or Windows Explorer, or you can just go ahead and check it out yourself from the command line. That can be possible too. I do an ls-l and I see dir1. I can cd into dir1 and do a pwd or do an ls-l and I see, oh, a dir2, a dir2b, dir2a, file1, and test1. So I'm seeing what's going on by CDing around, asking where I am with pwd, and doing an ls-l to see what's in there. But keep in mind, of course, that in many cases you can also look at your Finder window or your Windows Explorer window to see what folders are where. Now, I don't recommend this all the time because you may not have the convenience of being able to actually look at these file folders. We want to actually be able to go to any kind of environment and crack open a terminal window or command prompt window and be able to move around faithfully within it. So what commands have we learned? We've learned dir, which is only, or pwd, I'm sorry. We've learned pwd, which tells us where what's in our current folder. We've got cd, which will let us move up and down the family tree, the tree folders, in order to get to a particular folder. Maybe we want to issue a copy command or a move command or a remove command, or maybe we want to execute a script. So we looked at pwd, we looked at ls and dir to see what's in the folder, and we looked at cd to get around. Let's look at the command line reference, which you can find for both either the Windows, the beginning course or the advanced course. And here we see these lovely commands that let us do various things. We've got pwd, which is not needed on Windows, as I've mentioned. We've got cd, which takes us around the file system. We've got ls, which lists out the file system. And below that, we actually have a series of other commands that may or may not be useful to you, but that I thought I would include just to give you a sense of context here. Your goal in learning this is to be able to execute a Python script from the terminal window. So let's look at where I am now. I'm in dir1, and I see above that there are 4 entries within dir1. There's looks like 2 directories and 2 files. By the way, on Mac only, if you see that D, it means directory. That's not important. The main idea, of course, is that I can see files where I am, and if I wanted to execute a script, I could do it quite easily. What I can do is say python3 space and then test1.py. Now, this didn't work because I need to update the file, so I'm going to go in there and do that. But I hope you can see that it's actually pretty easy to open up files. Let's just open up file1.txt so that we can see it. But let's execute that from here. And it works. Now, we're not going to need it right away, but I want to make you familiar with the command line so that you can at least get around the file system and then also potentially start executing scripts from different locations. Again, like I said, you can do different kinds of work. Let's say renaming a file. In Unix, it's called MV, move, but you can change a file name if you want. It's going to be dependent on you to decide why you might need something or whether you'll need the command line. But for my part, I need to teach you how to use the command line, and that begins by using CD and ls or dir, being able to move up or down the tree, and then being able to execute a Python script from the command line. And do you see how I did that? I said Python 3 space and then the name of the script. And if I do that, I'm going to see, I'll see the output of that script. Let's try it again. Python 3, well, I'll tell you what, let's go somewhere else. I see that I'm in dir1. Let's go over to dir3a. How could I get there in one shot from dir1 to dir3a? Well, I can say cd, what's it called? dir2a / dir3a. And I got there in one, and now I'm here, and I'm going to do an ls-l to see what I've got in here. It's file 3a. I'm going to go ahead and edit file 3a to open up, rather test 3a, to open up, let's see, in the parent, which is dir3a, and in its parent, which is dir2a, and in this parent, dir1, and then to open a file within there. So pretty exciting. Let's see. I'm using some of these same techniques that I outlined in the other video for opening up a file in a different directory. This is saying go up 3 tiers and then go down 1 tier, and that's where you'll find your file. Let's try to run this from the command line. Test 3a. Now I'm going to use file complete, or did I do it before? I guess not. Python 3 test3a.py. And it opens up file 1 for me. So you can see that opening from the command line or running a script from the command line is not difficult. It's a matter of getting into the right directory, executing Python 3 usually, and then follow that with a script to be executed. And you'll find over time that the command line is far more convenient and far faster than the Windows environment. It's easier to make mistakes, but generally when you get to be familiar enough with things, you don't make too many mistakes. So just from there, I'd like you, again, to be able to move around the file tree and know where you are doing it and how to execute a Python script. And we'll probably do a little bit of this in the upcoming sessions up until we get to files and directories. And then we're going to need to do it in earnest. And I'll ask you to execute some of these scripts from the command line. Okay, I hope that was clear. Let me know your questions, and I'll see you in class.